James, a photographer, moved to an old city celebrated for its cobblestone streets and vibrant street performances. One evening, he wandered into the town square, camera in hand, drawn by whispers of a mysterious performer. At the square center, a woman stood, clad in a tattered white gown, her face eerily painted like cracked porcelain. Her movements were unnervingly fluid yet deliberate, as though she glided on air. Her eyes, wide and dark, seemed to pierce through the crowd. As James raised his camera, her head jerked toward him with unnatural speed. The crowd around her seemed oblivious to the sudden shift. He captured a single photo before her expression turned into a haunting smile that didn't reach her eyes. The onlookers suddenly dispersed, as though following an unspoken command, leaving James alone with the performer. She tilted her head, silently inviting him closer. Feeling a chill he couldn't explain, James lowered his camera and left the square. The image of her cracked smile burned into his mind. That night, sleep eluded him as he thought of the eerie woman and her haunting presence. The next morning, James reviewed the photos on his camera. Most were crisp, showcasing the square's charm, but the image of the performer was blurred and distorted. The once hauntingly graceful woman appeared as a smudge, her features warped beyond recognition. He leaned closer to his computer screen, trying to make sense of the distortion. Just then, a strange noise echoed in his studio, a soft, rhythmic tapping. He turned toward the window. A shadow moved, but nothing was there. Shaking off his unease, James printed the photo, hoping it would appear clearer. Instead, the printed image seemed worse. Her face was a chaotic swirl, yet her eyes remained sharp and vividly focused, as though staring directly at him. A sudden knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, no one was there, only a faint, earthy scent hanging in the air. On the doorstep lay a single, pale white glove, dirty and damp. It reminded him of the performer's attire. James felt a creeping dread. Closing the door firmly, he decided to stash the photograph in a drawer, unwilling to look at it again. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. James awoke to the sound of faint whispers like wind through the cracks of his apartment. His eyes darted to the corner of his room, where shadows seemed to move unnaturally. The glove he had left in the kitchen now lay at the foot of his bed. Unable to sleep, James decided to review the other photos he had taken that day. To his shock, the blurred figure of the performer appeared in unrelated photos. Standing among a group of children at the park, reflected faintly in the glass of a storefront, even in the background of a shot taken hours before he had seen her. The whispers grew louder. He tried to trace their source, but only found emptiness. Suddenly his phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screen. "Why did you look?" Panicked, James checked his locks and windows. Everything was secure, yet the sense of being watched was overwhelming. He glanced at the computer again. The distorted figure seemed closer, as if it had moved within the image. A loud knock shattered the silence. Trembling, James opened the door to find no one there. But the glove was gone. The next day, James returned to the square to confront his growing paranoia. The bustling crowd seemed oblivious to his unease. He scanned for the performer, but she was nowhere to be seen. James approached a vendor, asking about her. The man froze, his cheerful demeanor replaced by a grave expression. "The silent performer?" he muttered. "She's a legend, appears only to those who shouldn't have seen her." When pressed for details, the vendor hesitated. "Years ago there was a performer here, a woman in white. She never spoke, just acted. One night she vanished after a man mocked her. He died soon after in strange circumstances." James's stomach turned. He rushed back to his apartment, only to find the photograph he had hidden now lying in the middle of the floor. The image was no longer distorted. The performer's face was clear, her cracked smile sharper, her eyes boring into his soul. Something felt wrong. The air was heavy, the light dimmer. He checked the locks again, but deep down, he knew they wouldn't protect him. James began noticing shadows that didn't belong. In his reflection, he would see faint outlines of the performer standing behind him, her expression unchanging. One evening, he walked through the park, hoping to calm his nerves. The air was chilly, the trees swayed, and the laughter of children echoed faintly. But as he passed the pond, he saw her reflection in the water. She wasn't on the path, but behind him, standing unnaturally still. He turned sharply, but she wasn't there. Heart racing, he ran home, feeling an unseen force pursuing him. His breath quickened, his vision blurred, and his mind screamed for him to stop looking over his shoulder. Back in his apartment, he locked the door and windows again. This time, he noticed something new. The glove he thought had disappeared now rested on his nightstand. Beside it lay a small card, inscribed with the words, "You shouldn't have taken my picture." James's world spun. He clutched the card, the words burning into his mind. James's sleep was restless. Shadows in his room seemed alive, shifting when he wasn't looking. Each time he awoke, the glove appeared closer to him, on the nightstand, the floor, then the edge of his bed. By morning, James decided to visit the local archives to uncover the truth about the performer. The librarian, a woman with tired eyes, hesitated when he mentioned the silent performer. "She's not real. But people say she's cursed," she whispered, sliding a brittle newspaper toward him. The article described a street performer, Lydia Thorne, who captivated audiences but vanished after a tragic accident involving a fire. A photograph of her smiling eerily accompanied the story. It was her, the same woman from James's photograph. As James left the library, he felt the weight of invisible eyes on him. Shadows lingered unnaturally in the corners, and his reflection in the glass doors seemed slightly delayed. Returning home, James saw something strange in his bathroom mirror. Written in condensation were the words, "You can't escape." The air was dry, no steam could have created it. Panicking, he wiped the mirror, but the message reappeared, clearer this time. His reflection stared back, but something was off. The shadows in the background twisted unnaturally, and the silent performer's face appeared behind him. Spinning around, he found no one. Heart pounding, he grabbed his phone and took a picture of the mirror. The screen displayed not just the message, but also a figure standing in the hallway. He dropped the phone, its screen cracking as it hit the floor. The sound of faint footsteps echoed through his apartment. They stopped abruptly at his door. Determined to get away, James packed a bag and left for a hotel. The city streets were eerily empty, as if the world had grown still. Even the bustling town square was silent. As he drove, his car's radio flickered on and off, static hissing before a soft voice whispered, "Stay with me." James yanked the radio dial, but the voice grew louder. He switched it off entirely, but the whisper persisted, now seemingly inside his head. When he finally reached the hotel, the receptionist greeted him warmly, but as James glanced over her shoulder, he saw the performer standing in the reflection of a decorative mirror. She raised a hand, beckoning. His knees buckled, and the receptionist rushed to steady him. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked, her face filled with concern. James nodded weakly, avoiding the mirror. The hotel room was simple and clean, but James couldn't relax. He kept the lights on, his bag by the door for a quick escape. As the night deepened, the room grew colder. The TV turned on by itself, displaying static. James unplugged it, but the static remained, accompanied by faint laughter. He covered the screen with a blanket, but shadows danced on the walls, forming shapes he couldn't ignore. He felt the performer's presence, her cracked porcelain face flashing in his mind whenever he closed his eyes. The glove, which he had left at his apartment, now lay on the bedside table. Beside it was a note. "Why do you run?" James screamed, throwing the glove into the corner. His phone buzzed with a notification. The message was from an unknown number. A single photo of his hotel room taken from outside the window. Desperation led James back to the archives. He hoped to find a way to break the curse. The librarian handed him a sealed envelope marked with Lydia Thorne's name. Inside was a letter. "To the one who sees me, you have taken what wasn't yours. Return it, or I will take what is mine." James remembered the photograph, the image he had taken of her. Could this be what she wanted? He decided to destroy the photo, hoping it would end his torment. That night, he set the photo on fire in a metal bowl. As the flames consumed it, he heard a blood-curdling scream echo through his apartment. The windows shattered, and the room filled with icy air. For a moment, James thought it was over. But as the smoke cleared, he saw her reflection in the shards of broken glass, her smile wider than ever. James awoke to a suffocating silence. His apartment was eerily still, but something was wrong. The photograph he had burned the night before now lay on his desk, untouched by fire. The image was clearer than before. Lydia's face dominated the frame, her eyes glaring at him with malevolent intent. Her cracked porcelain smile seemed wider, almost mocking. Beside the photo was a new note. "You cannot destroy me." Terrified, James grabbed the photo and ran to the fireplace in his apartment building's lounge. He tossed it into the roaring flames and watched as it blackened and curled. But the moment he stepped back, the photograph was in his hand again, pristine. The performer's voice echoed faintly in his ears. "You must see me." Panicked, James threw the photo to the floor, where it remained still. But as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, he heard footsteps behind him, deliberate and slow, following him with every step. Unable to stay in his apartment, James wandered the city streets aimlessly, hoping to escape the relentless torment. He found himself in a narrow, dimly lit alley he didn't recognize. The air was thick and the silence oppressive. As he walked, the performer appeared at the far end of the alley, her white gown glowing faintly in the dark. She didn't move, but her presence was suffocating. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, her cracked smile widening as she raised a gloved hand and beckoned him forward. James froze, his instincts screaming to flee, but his feet felt rooted in place. The walls around him seemed to close in, the bricks shifting and warping as though alive. The performer's eyes gleamed in the darkness, and the alley seemed to stretch endlessly. Suddenly, James bolted in the opposite direction. But no matter how far he ran, he always ended up back at the same spot, facing her. Exhausted and terrified, he collapsed, her laughter echoing all around him. Desperate for answers, James returned to the librarian, begging for more information. The librarian reluctantly revealed an old journal written by Lydia Thorne's former assistant. The entries described her obsession with being remembered and her rage when her performances were ignored. One entry read, "She made me promise to never forget her. She said her spirit would live on, that she'd ensure no one could escape her gaze." The journal hinted at a ritual Lydia performed shortly before her death. A small cryptic drawing showed a mirror surrounded by symbols, with a phrase underneath, "Only truth can free you." James asked what it meant, but the librarian shook her head. visibly shaken. "You're cursed now. She'll never stop until you face her." Determined to end this, James decided to find Lydia's old belongings, hoping they held the key to her curse. James tracked down the theater where Lydia had performed. It had been abandoned for decades, its facade crumbling under years of neglect. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, revealing a vast, dark space filled with decaying props and costumes. He searched the room, his flashlight casting eerie shadows. The air felt heavy, as though the building itself were alive. James finally found a dusty trunk labeled Lydia Thorne. Inside were old costumes, a cracked porcelain mask, and a small hand mirror. As he touched the mirror, the room grew colder. Lydia's voice echoed faintly. "Look into the truth." The symbols from the journal were faintly etched on the mirror's frame. James felt compelled to look into it, but his instincts screamed to stop. He pocketed the mirror instead, determined to learn more before using it. Back in his apartment, James examined the mirror. Its surface seemed unnaturally dark, almost liquid. As he hesitated, the room filled with whispers. Unable to resist, he finally looked into the glass. The reflection was not his own. Instead, he saw Lydia's final moments. The fire engulfing the theater. Her porcelain mask melting onto her face as she screamed. Her rage-filled eyes locked onto James, and he felt her fury like a physical blow. The mirror shattered in his hands, and the room plunged into darkness. When the lights flickered back on, shards of the mirror floated in the air, forming Lydia's haunting visage. She whispered, "You took what was mine. Now, I take what is yours." The shards of the broken mirror clattered to the floor, but Lydia's voice remained. It reverberated through the room, shaking the walls. "You cannot hide from me. Your time is ending." James stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding hands. The air grew colder, and frost formed on the windows. Lydia appeared in the corner of the room, her porcelain face cracked but unyielding. Her gloved hands reached toward James, though she didn't move closer. "What do you want?" James cried. "To be remembered," she hissed. Her face contorted into a grotesque smile. "Give me your stage." James realized she sought more than acknowledgement. She wanted him to spread her curse, to perform her story. If he refused, she would consume him entirely. The shadows around him twisted, and Lydia's image multiplied, surrounding him on all sides. Overwhelmed, James collapsed to his knees. "I'll find a way to stop you," he whispered, though doubt gnawed at him. Determined to end the curse, James returned to the theater with the journal and the mirror shards. He pieced together the ritual described in the journal, hoping to banish Lydia for good. The stage was covered in dust, and the air felt alive with tension. James drew the symbols from the journal on the floor using chalk, arranging the mirror shards in a circle. In the center, he placed the glove and the burned photograph. As he recited the chant, the air grew heavier, and the room darkened. Lydia appeared on the stage, her movements slow and deliberate. Her cracked face reflected the dim light, and her voice was low and menacing. "You cannot undo what has been done. You are mine." James's voice wavered as he continued the ritual. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, and Lydia screamed, her form flickering between solid and shadow. The ritual seemed to weaken Lydia, but her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You seek to banish me, but you cannot erase memory." James stopped chanting, his heart pounding. Lydia's eyes burned with fury and desperation. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. "Remember me. Tell my story," she said, her voice cracking with sorrow. For the first time, she seemed almost human. James hesitated, realizing the truth. Lydia wasn't just a vengeful spirit. She was a soul trapped by her own obsession. He made a decision. I'll tell your story, but you have to leave me alone. The glowing symbols dimmed and Lydia stepped back, her form fading slightly. Do not fail me, she warned before vanishing into the shadows. James recorded a video recounting Lydia's life and tragic death, framing her story as a cautionary tale. He posted it online, hoping to satisfy her demand for remembrance. The video went viral, and Lydia's name became known once more. But as James watched the views climb, a chill ran down his spine. His reflection in the screen twisted, and Lydia's face appeared briefly, smiling. Her voice whispered from the speakers, "You've done well, but this is only the beginning." James felt no relief, only dread. He had fulfilled her wish, but he realized too late that spreading her story might spread her curse. Weeks passed, and James thought he had escaped Lydia's grasp. But one night, he heard faint applause echoing through his apartment. The lights flickered, and the glove reappeared on his desk. When he picked it up, his vision blurred, and he found himself on the theater stage. An audience of shadows filled the seats, their faces featureless. Lydia stood beside him, her cracked face smiling triumphantly. "Welcome to the stage," she said. The shadows applauded as James's voice failed him. He realized with growing horror that he was now part of her story, bound to perform for eternity. The curtain fell, leaving him in darkness, with Lydia's laughter echoing endlessly. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more new videos.